سلام دوستان، تانیر وکیلی هستم و این ویدیو رو از شهر زیبای کوپرتینو برای شما آماده میکنیم. در حضور یکی از دوستانم شان هستیم. شان پژوهشگر اقلیت های دانشگاه دیانزا و مرکز ویداست. Hi guys, this is Tanir. We are podcasting this video from Dianza College in Cupertino, California. I have a very good friend of mine. I just met a friend, Shawn, who's doing some research on minority student, and he's using the Vida as the center for his PhD thesis and PhD studies. Would you like to introduce yourself, Shawn?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Shawn Crossland. I run a community engagement center at Salt Lake Community College that's in some ways similar to Vida, in some ways different. And then I'm also a doctoral student in educational leadership and policy at the University of Utah. So I am doing my dissertation research here at Dianza, and Vida is kind of been my host for this adventure. So it's been an adventure for sure.
I would like to use this opportunity to send my regards to my Mormon friends from Utah, Andrew Nelson. Hi Andrew, I'm not sure if it's gonna reach to you, but we lost in touch back in 2006, and you and your wonderful wife always open your arms, and I really appreciate that you always have open arms for sport activity in your church and your home. And I just want to send my regards to all of my Mormon friends back in Los Angeles. Okay, Shawn, how did you decide to work on minority students? I mean, I have a minority background. I am a Sunni Turkmen in Iran, and then I moved to Turkey for high school. So I had another minority status as an Iranian in Turkey, and I studied in the university there, and then with the hope of the soccer scholarship, I came to America in 2001, and then I have a religious minority in America, religious minority identity as a Muslim. So would you like to just explain how did you decide to work on this, and what was the most challenging or what's interesting?
Well, I think that my study didn't start. It started with a broad interest in civic learning and democratic engagement. So the idea being how community colleges teach civic learning, right? Teach individuals the ability to navigate complex decision-making structures and bureaucracies and things like that, and the democratic engagement piece being, you know, how to get involved, how to make a change, how to influence some change. So that's kind of the broad, and specifically at community colleges, right? And part of the...
Is there any specific reason you choose the community colleges? Why not the four-year universities, or why not, like, I mean, like, I hope it's not offensive, but did you want to classify the middle classes specifically, or is there any specific reason for that?
Yeah, I think actually I heard it best. One of the faculty here has described it.
And no names.
The best.
I don't want names, because then I have to get permission from them.
Right. So
you can mention the first name if you want.
I think that it's a fairly, it seems to be a fairly common expression that the role of the community college is to serve the top 100% of the students, right? And so what that means is community colleges don't pick and choose only the best, or only the students who they think are going to necessarily, you know, go on and get a degree and make millions of dollars, right? Community colleges' role is to serve every student who walks through their doors, no matter their race, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their socioeconomic status, no matter what prior educational experiences they have, right? If they haven't had college level English or math, right? That's the community college's role, is to serve every student who walks through their door. So that's why, that's why the community college is the most interesting to me, and why I chose.
Dianza was the only community college that you did the research, or there was other community college maybe in Southern California that, because I went to Santa Monica and also Orange Coast College, and atmosphere, even the fact that there was maybe a 1 hour difference, the atmosphere in Los Angeles and Santa Monica is way different than the Orange County, which is like, you know, the Republican side of the, and then the whole idea of my experience as an adult in 2011 that I moved to Bay Area and came to community college for secondary education was totally different. So it was the only community college that you, or like?
No, so I actually had not even been on the De Anza's campus when I chose to do the study here. The Leadership for Social Change certificate was the motivation, because that's a kind of an exemplar among community colleges in the country that, you know, this.
Did you have any friend who was part of this program, or you just all of a sudden, how did you get to know the Vida?
So I learned about it at a conference about 6 years ago, because I'm also trying to start a similar certificate at Salt Lake Community College. And so I learned about it at a conference, and they gave me contact info, and I cold called over here, and she answered and was super supportive.
Cynthia
answered and said, and said, "Oh, that's awesome. Tell me how I can help. Tell me what I can, And then there's a national network of community colleges that are doing similar work called the Community Learning Partnership. So other community colleges around the country that are all trying to promote pathways to careers as change agents is the expression that they use. And so the one of the decisions that I had to make in designing the study was whether to try to visit several, or to have a deeper, more meaningful experience with one. And so I thought
Would you just talk to the camera? So
yeah, sure.
You want to read with the audience, not me.
Yeah.
Necessarily. But did you finish? I'm sorry.
So the choice was whether or not to have a really deep experience with one place, or to visit several other, right? And so I chose to spend more time with one site to get a more rich understanding.
I appreciate the fact that you just trusted me with recording. You didn't know me, and you just it's really happened. And I'm really excited about your project. And if it's not too much to ask, I would really like you to do some research or some work on San Jose or Fremont community colleges, when unfortunately, with no offense, we don't have that much of African American in this campus. And I would like you to have some sort of interaction with those people, and those people would have some sort of a say in your research. It's very unfortunate that the beautiful African American community are not that much involved in Silicon Valley, and we don't have that much of a African community in the De Anza College. And I'm hoping that they will choose De Anza College for their future education, or somehow we overcome this gap. It's I used to have a lot of African American friends back in Los Angeles, and I know how much they can contribute to the diversity of the campus. So do you mind if I ask, you don't need to answer this question, but this is the very first time that you spent so much time in California. The reason I'm asking is that, when you're coming from a very solo cultural white background, how did you did you face a cultural shock when you come to the diverse area and just start to living there, and how that reflects you, because and how did that affect your way of thinking?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a culture shock necessarily. Certainly, drastically different between Utah and between anywhere in Utah, even Salt Lake, which is the most kind of urban epicenter in the Bay Area. I would say that the traffic was a culture shock. I would say that the density was a culture shock, but I wouldn't. I haven't. I haven't lived an exactly sheltered life. There was one instance when one of the first meetings I came to, I kind of, I noticed that I was the only, or perceived that I was the only white person in the room, and I was reflecting with somebody afterwards, and I said, that rarely happens that I'm the
I don't want you to assume that we don't have white people in the Deans of College.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah,
and I don't mean to imply that at all. I just it happened to be that this meeting I was the only white person there, and I just kind of reflected. I was like, that doesn't happen very often in Utah.
Do you mind if I do some
Sure.
political statement? Unlike Mr. Trump, we don't classify people based on their race. I can say that the Deans of College is probably friendly to any people with any background, and we don't. I can easily say that this is the most liberal place that I have been in. We welcome any people with any background. You don't need to answer this question, but do you believe we have Islamophobia in America?
Yeah, I think there's definitely Islamophobia in America, unfortunately. I think there's...
With your introduction, you are fasting today, just to, for the very first time. Would you like to explain how did you decide to fast and your interaction with that student without mentioning names?
Yeah, sure. So, I designed my entire dissertation experience to be personally transformative. So that's one of the reasons why I came to a new place and spent a lot of time, as opposed to just flying and visiting some other places, that I would actually kind of be a resident here for a little while, and trying to change lots of things. I'm not driving my truck to campus. I'm riding my bike to campus. All sorts of little things like that.
Do you mind if where do you stay in this area?
I'm just in Western San Jose, so I'm about 5 miles from campus. So, trying to be more mindful of how I interact with people and how I show up in spaces, and my technology use was a big one that was kind of on my radar, that I felt like I was wasting a lot of time and energy on just flipping through my phone or looking at social media. And one of the students caught up with me as she was I think it was the day before Ramadan started.
Okay.
And and she was talking to me about preparing for it, and she kind of had to she sort of braced herself because the start was really challenging, but she really appreciated the experience because it was it was at the same time challenging, and it also meant that she spent a lot of time with her family when they broke the fast every evening. Like, they didn't normally have family meals, but so it was kind of a fun exchange, and I was intrigued. I'm not a religious person. I haven't grown up with any religion, and I appreciate some aspects, I think, of all religions, and certainly have an interest in the spiritual, and and she said, oh, you should try it sometime. You should really try it sometime. I think it'd be a neat experience for you. And so I just said, sure, why not, right? This is a student who's willing to work with me and participate in my research for my dissertation, and she kind of I would say challenge, but in a kind of a fun, like, you should try it way. And so I said sure, and she gave me some tips and said when to. So I woke up at 4:40 this morning, and had some toast and an avocado and some yogurt, and drank a bunch of water, because I drink a lot of water during the day, and I was kind of nervous that I'd get super thirsty, and it's been an interesting experience. But
do you feel super thirsty right now?
Do I feel not right this second, but I was like almost falling asleep on the couch a few minutes right before, actually, while you were in there talking. It just kind of.
So I'm assuming your blood pressure is down.
Probably, yeah, probably. My watch will actually show me some of those stats, but so yeah, I thought it was a kind of a gesture of solidarity, right? That if this is something that's certainly significant to that student, and then significant to so many people around the world, that I could at least give it a go. And I will say, I'm definitely going to eat tomorrow, but I'm intrigued to think about how, like, the significance of fasting could be.
Are you going to attend any iftar tonight with any community?
I'm not. No.
Oh, okay. Because the Ramadan is the holiest month for Muslims, and they are going based on the usual calendar is based on the sun, but Arabic calendar is based on the moon, so it shifts. We can have Ramadan and fasting during the winter and summer and all kind of stuff. But at least for me, I'm gonna fast tomorrow. the most beautiful part of that day. I'm not religious as well, but I'm doing the fasting for another reason that I will explain. But the most beautiful part of the Ramadan or fasting is the iftar. You know, when all of the Muslims are sitting all gathering together and it become like a social interchange and they eat together. I would highly recommend you to attend one of them if you can. You know, there are a couple of mosques that they provide free food, and it will give you a different perspective about how people are dining together. And so, on the subject of Islamophobia, have you been to Middle East or any Islamic country?
I have not.
Have you traveled outside of US?
Only a couple times.
In Europe or?
Yeah, Europe once, Canada a couple times, and Mexico a couple times. So, not too much world travel yet, but it's definitely something that I want to do more of. So,
I mean, it seems that you're a pretty educated person, but do you feel like Middle East is far a different world? Like, you know, when you see the news about Middle East, how do you think about it? Like, you know, I'm not interested. I don't know what's going on, and like.
No, I think that unfortunately, like most things, there's just so much going on that it's hard to sort of sort through and determine what are the threads worth following and what's just kind of noise, and I think that you know, I mean, my earliest kind of memory of the Middle East would be Gulf War stuff, probably, right? And at that time, I think the dominant narrative in the U.S. was just generally that, like, there's bad stuff in the Middle East, you know, just kind of I have a close friend who spent.
Does that surprise you when we have a Republican president in the White House? There's usually a war. Like, from 1960 all the way to today, whenever a Republican president comes to the White House, there's definitely a war, and some sort of, you know, weapon maker companies are selling weapons to the government and take some innocent people to the war. Is Utah, like, could we call Utah a very army-friendly state, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very conservative state.
Do you have any friends who served in Iraq?
Who served in Iraq, yeah, and Afghanistan, yeah.
How they share their experiences? I mean, if it's not too personal to share.
Yeah, I mean, pretty limitedly overall, I would say. I think that you know, people share in different ways. Utah is definitely a pro-gun state where I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard a rumor that we're the only state that has on our college campuses, on our state college campuses, allows concealed carry. So, you know, concealed carry of firearms is legal and permitted in Utah, and I don't know if other colleges allow that, but I know that the state schools in Utah are technically supposed to allow it, which is kind of interesting. Not necessarily directly related to the military, but I think it certainly speaks to a culture of.
You know what scares me? I'm gonna be a citizen hopefully in 2 days, and like, if you're gonna have armed Muslims in this country, you know, when they become citizen or if they get a chance to own the gun, that's gonna be a very big challenge.
Yeah, I mean,
because, like, you know, the ownership of a gun is some sort of American culture. We have the mentality. I don't know. I never hold a gun, so I don't know how to say it. But, like, unfortunately, for the Middle Eastern Muslims, gun is something strange, and, like, God knows.
Yeah.
If that part of America, who are immigrated to America, decide that they have to have a right and experience that right in their daily life, what we are going to do?
Yeah, you know, that's a really interesting question to think about. The kind of, you know, the super pro gun folks and how they feel if that gets turned into, you know, meaning that Muslim Americans are now carrying guns all the time. I think that's kind of an interesting challenge because the kind of stereotypical person that you think of that's pro-gun may or may not. You know, I'm not gonna speculate or generalize, but I could see groups of people not being super comfortable with the idea with Muslim Americans carrying guns, and that kind of being at odds with the whole Second Amendment.
Do you think we have to give it? I mean, I'm Middle Eastern. I'm not religious, but I'm Middle Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we have to give a sort of brown racial type to Middle Eastern? I mean, don't you think if we give like the sort of brown people, it would be, it's much easier to, you know, to deal with the identity of the Muslim or Middle Eastern? What do you think about that?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding you right. Can you rephrase the?
I am racially labeled white, and I was in prison in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But in prison, Muslims or Middle Eastern are next to blacks.
Yeah.
They are not with white Americans. Whites are mixed with Mexicans or Latinos. No offense to my Mexican friends, but so I'm considered white, but in hospitals or in the, you know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
If they give me a brown identity, it's more because I'm not white in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not being
Mm-hmm.
considered white.
Yeah, okay. I think I understand. I mean, I think that the United States has a need to sort of interrogate the value of categorizing race in any way, in which, you know, there are differing perspectives on that from a sort of equity perspective, right? And to the kind of what you opened up with, my study isn't specifically about any underrepresented students. I would never use the term, or try not to use the term, minority, because that implies some kind of lesser than, right? And so
not necessarily. I mean, like...
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just comes down to sort of categorical, right? What is the value of sort of tracking individuals? And I think that there are times when it is valuable, right? With the idea of an equity agenda at a community college, we should ask why, to your point, why are there so few black students or African American students here? That's a question that this institution needs to ask, but also this whole community needs to ask, right? But to at the same time, kind of having categories are always going to be limiting, right? So perfect example is, you know, how far we've come from, you know, it was like white or other were the two categories, right? And now we've got this expanded menu of racial identities that people sort of select into, but white is still a sort of a blanket, right? Like if I identify as white and you identify as white, my family's mostly from Germany, Dutch, and Denmark, right?
Yeah.
And so and you're from the Middle East.
I am from my ancestors are from Mongolia.
Mongolia, okay, yeah. And you said Turkey.
I have a
Turkey
Turkish
and
blood.
Iran.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm
Right.
Iranian. I'm proud Iranian.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm Turkmen Iranian, and like my ancestors are all outside from Mongolia, and like I have Genghis Khan.
Mm-hmm.
Genghis Khan, warrior mentality.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
back on the Islamophobia, in your research, how did you interact? Did you get a chance to share of the feeling or any sort of bad memories or interaction that Muslim students has in regard of Islamophobia?
Not specifically. Not specifically, because the kind of larger the focus of my study is kind of equity, democracy, and justice, right? Would be that's kind of the three keywords that I'm working with right now. And the way that my study is framed is a positive oriented approach. And so the analogy that I sort of have used to describe it is that it's like when you learn how to drive a car. When I was taught to drive a car, you know, I'd get, you start driving and it's really fun, and then, there'd be a curve and you wouldn't know how fast the curve was, and you start to get scared and because you wouldn't know if you were going to cut too sharp or go too wide, and And my dad would say, don't look at the ditch that you don't want to hit, or don't look at the car that's coming at you in oncoming traffic, right? Like, look down the road at the direction that you want to go, right? And so kind of translating that into my study is what I'm hoping to do is to find, not to ignore injustices that take place, for example, Islamophobia or any kind of phobia or ism that's othering people, but to find those examples of where the good things are happening, right? And ask the question of how can we have more of those good things? How can we hold up that what's happening that we really like, and how can we ask the question of what else do we want, as opposed to focusing the time and the energy on all of those injustices and those things that are going wrong. Not because those aren't important and don't have to be addressed, but that's just sort of one, the approach that I've taken to it is a very positive mindset approach. So.
Okay, let me just switch the conversation based on my experience in American educational system. My father, Farsi is the dominant language in my country, and my father went to school without knowing any word in Farsi, and his mother tongue was Turkmenish and Turkmen, and we have this problem that on the constitution of Iran or the constitution of Middle Eastern country, you have a right to do your studies in your mother tongue. Like, you have a right to go to the public school which is taught Spanish, but no government exercise that, at least not in Iran and Turkey, the countries that I lived. And don't you think, like, for example, when one Spanish background students walk into the classroom at the age of 7 and he doesn't speak English, don't you think, we have that problem for Kurdish identity people in Turkey. They grown up in the country, in their families that they speak Kurdish and they don't know Turkish, and the public school is taught in Turkish language. Don't you think that create a lot of disadvantage for the person? Because, like, we are having agenda for the kid who speak at least 5 years of the mother tongue in the dominant culture. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah, I think it's really an overall challenging situation, because it's certainly disadvantaged youth who are trying to stay kind of on track, and I use that very loosely, but who are trying to progress through any kind of educational system in a different language. That has to be incredibly challenging. I'm a single language. I have very, very limited Spanish and even more limited French, and so I can't imagine what it would be like to try to navigate an educational system. It's also a strain on the educational systems if you think about it, right? I wonder how many languages are represented at De Anza, and how much it would take, what kind of resources it would take to have equal access to all of the resources at De Anza in every language. And that's not to say that shouldn't be a goal. I think, in fact, that that should be a goal if the point of the community college is to serve 100% of the students who walk through the door, then that includes whatever language they speak. I think, to your point, unfortunately, when that happens at even younger ages, that can create even bigger kind of gaps in educational experiences for students. That by the time a student who's been struggling through a second language gets to a community college, they're going to be well behind their peers in kind of the standard academic performance categories, and so that creates another challenge to try to get them brought up to grade level to get that successful attainment of a higher education. So
I'm one of the community member of Vida, and I was part of a program before Vida, back in 2011 to 2014, and I attend a lot of nonviolence communication with Edmondo. I would like to send my regards to Edmondo and Cynthia from here. One of the things that I progressed during this educational thing in the age of 31 to 34 is, like, I didn't know when I'm being racist or I'm being discriminatory or prejudiced against the dominant culture.
Mm.
I am doing the same thing that I always label the other side. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when, you know, at least in Iranian culture, we have this, no offense to my American friend, but like, American are mainly not educated or not have a global point of view, and we have to accept the way they are and dismiss them. Like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you mention this? Like, when you're calling a white trash, or like,
Mm-hmm.
when you are trying to just show your frustration, you are doing the same, racial approach to the dominant culture, and you are doing the same mistake.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that that for me it comes down to just to making a conscious and constant effort to sort of interrogate what those biases of mine are and what the intention behind them is. I had a mentor, have a mentor. I don't want to make it sound like he's no longer around, but a while ago he told me he does a ton of really awesome anti-racism training and equity work, and at the University of Utah, doing some really cool stuff. He leads the president's task force for anti-racism, and and he said, I like to start my trainings by saying, I'm probably a racist, and he's a old white dude, and so he said that usually takes people off guard, and he just says, I just like to get that out in the open. I think that there's some things about ourselves that we can continually work on, but there's these biases that we have for whatever reason, wherever those came from. I grew up in the Midwest, and had a very very mono racial upbringing, if you will, and so until I got old enough to go to work in Springfield, but so I think that some of it is just being able to ask ourselves those questions of like, what am I hoping to accomplish, right? And knowing that, especially when you get into the whole microaggression layer of things, right? Like, we're always going to make mistakes, and the point is that not that we're going to be perfect one day. I think but that we're willing to continually challenge that and to ask those questions and say, where could I have done better? How could I have made that interaction, more meaningful or more authentic to express what I'm hoping to express. So I think that's impressive for you to have these conversations recorded, right? Because then you have to go back and look at them, and I would always second guess myself and be like, oh, should I have said that better, or should I have said that better? So
I think like the way we are dealing with the racism is always evolving, right? Like the level of your deal with the racism or the mistake that you do as a racist person. I mean, like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, the level of the mistake that you have done based on your prejudice in age of 30 should be way different than age of 40, and like, because there's 10 years gap, and like there's.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think of it, right? That we should strive to be continually growing and continually opening our minds, right, of what that means. There's a really good book. I can't remember the author's name that I read, and I want to say it's called Color Mute, and the idea is that we still don't know when we should be talking about race and when we shouldn't be talking about race, and we don't know that. They're looking at it from an educational perspective.
I had a very interesting. I don't know which African American actor said that, but we can deal the problem of racism if we giving up labeling it. Like, you are gonna call me Mr. Wakili, and I'm gonna call you Mr. Shawn, and your identity is gonna be your last name, not the way you look or the color of your skin. So that question being asked, I'm gonna ask you a very interesting question, and you may not like to answer this question, but just imagine, America is your homeland, and I am some sort of immigrant here. Let's just change the status. let's imagine that we are in Iran and you are immigrated to Iran, and based on your socialization with me for the last 5 or 6 hours, how would you think 10 years describing America to Iranians in his homeland? Do you think I am anti-American government? Or do you think I am pro-American? Or
that's a tricky one to answer because I feel like we have been chatting, but I think that there's a tricky when you say
I would like you to, based on your interaction, I'm not sure how much unique or interesting person I am in your eyes, but how you would describe my experience of American life.
From what I can tell, you are trying to, at least from what you've described to me, you're trying to articulate the value and the meaning that you've found in your experiences here, and and while that doesn't mean that you're, let me think. So I think that you can be patriotic and you can be against the actions of the government, right? And I think that when you say anti-government, that creates this kind of particular lens where like you must be anti-American, but like I think that from as near as I can tell, what you're trying to describe is more authentic narratives of what it means to be an American with individual values, as opposed to sort of what fits into that stereotype, especially under the current administration that has some very...
we are in the... Okay, let me just put it in this different one. Then we have to go, both of us have to go. But I really appreciate your time in the middle of your busy schedule that you put time for this interview. In the eyes of Iranian government and Iranian authorities, for someone who lived in America for 17 or 18 years old, I am American. Like, I have to forfeit a lot of rights that I have in my own country because I am living abroad. And it's way difficult to explain that all of this 18 years that I live in America, at least for a good amount of 7 or 8 years, I struggled with the immigration system. And I didn't want to cheat the system by playing the victim of, refugee or applying because America is the only country in the earth that if you put your feet on this country, you have rights. And it's not easy to deport you as it's easy in Canada or in Australia or in Europe. They can easily ship you out without any explanation, especially in England. And I was an undocumented student back then. You have a right to go to the court and defend your case. And in any time during that process, if you say to the judge, if you deport me, I will be in trouble in my country, they don't deport you. And there is a lot of immigrants, at least from my background, who's abusing that. They're applying for asylum when they don't have any problem back in home. And they are a burden to the system, in my opinion, because asylum, the beauty of the asylum, or the right of asylums to come to America and experience the freedom of this country, is for the people who really, their life is in danger in the other countries. And America can be the safe haven, at least they're trying to be, for those people whose life is in danger back home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that
So it's a two-way street. If you're having an immigration problem here, it's not necessarily one way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure. I think that it's impossible to think about. For me, that opens up a whole nother conversation about what it means to be a United States citizen, right? And the entire country was kind of founded on stolen land, right? So, and I think that what it means to have whether it's having your life in danger or having your way of life in danger, I think should classify for some kind of asylum. But I'm afraid that we're going to open another 30-minute conversation with that one. So.
I would like to, if I'm not sending a wrong message to undocumented students, which I was an undocumented student, undocumented students in the Vienna campus have one good advantage that none of undocumented students in the other cities have. You are in the heart of Silicon Valley, and you can go to all of these entrepreneurs, owner of the startups, and talk to them. Even talking to them is a very huge amount of value and education for you. Like you can come up with a next solution with technology and just create job for yourself. And unfortunately, at least based on my experience, a lot of undocumented students in this campus don't take that route. I don't know why. We have funding for entrepreneur undocumented students. I just saw it on the website. And like in the place that export technology to the rest of the world, we are missing that part. You know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like the opportunities are everywhere in Silicon Valley. Just go out, search for it, fight for it, and you wouldn't have the rights that you have in Silicon Valley anywhere, even in California. I mean, I had the very bad and rough times in Los Angeles, in Orange County, and I hope that I'm not sound pro supremacy white or like I am with the system, but I don't know. I compare your life to the undocumented Afghans in my country, in Iran. I compare your life to undocumented Syrians in Turkey. You have a lot of rights in this country. You have a lot of advantages, and just search for them. That's what I would like to request from you guys. And I am trying to start a program that provide non-paid internship for undocumented students, so they go to the heart of the corporations or the startups and get the experience of the entrepreneurship. So, anyway, for wrap up, do you have any last comment or anything that you want to?
I mean, I don't think so. I think I'd be interested to check out the other videos on your site and see, you know.
I would like to welcome you. I would like to invite you to Turkey and to my country, Iran. Maybe one day I can host you for a iftar
cool.
setting
Yeah.
in my country, and then we have a different interaction based on it. Okay, thank you for your time, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really nice to meet you, and good luck. I would like to see the results and read your paper after PhD. And keep in touch, huh?
Will do. Cheers.